Have you ever noticed that the deepest changes in life don't arrive with noise, but with silence? That question alone is enough to make many people pause. Because if we're honest, most of our lives have been shaped by movement, by sound, by urgency. We wake up to alarms. We rush through schedules. We fill every empty space with conversation, television, music, notifications, and somewhere along the way, we begin to believe that being alive means being busy. Yet quietly, almost unnoticed, life holds a paradox. The louder the world becomes around us, the further we drift from ourselves. You may recognize this without needing anyone to explain it. There are moments when you've achieved what you thought you wanted, kept up with what was expected, done everything right by the standards of the world, and still felt oddly disconnected, not broken, not unhappy in a dramatic way, just distant, like you're watching your own life from behind a pane of glass. And then, sometimes without warning, life becomes quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet we imagine on vacation brochures, but a real quiet, a season where plans slow down, relationships change, roles fall away, the phone rings less, the noise thins out, and suddenly, you find yourself alone with something you've been avoiding for years: your own presence. Picture an early morning just before the sun fully rises. The house is still. No one needs anything from you. There's no role to perform, no expectation to meet. For a brief moment, you are not a parent, not a partner, not a worker, not a problem solver. You are simply here, breathing, aware, existing without explanation. That moment may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because the mind, conditioned by years of noise, often interprets stillness as emptiness. But this is where the misunderstanding begins. Awakening does not begin with effort. It does not arrive through force, discipline, or mental struggle. It begins the moment you stop running. Most people believe awakening is something you do, something you achieve, something that requires constant improvement and relentless self-work. But that belief itself belongs to the old pattern, the pattern of striving, fixing, becoming. In truth, awakening starts when you allow life to pause you, when the current slows enough for you to feel what has always been flowing beneath the surface. Silence is not the absence of life. Silence is where life reveals itself. Think of a lake on a windy day. The surface is restless, distorted by waves. You can't see clearly into the water. But when the wind settles, when the surface becomes still, the depth becomes visible. Nothing new was added to the lake. The clarity was already there. It simply needed stillness to appear. Human consciousness works the same way. When your life is loud, your awareness skims the surface. When your life becomes quiet, awareness sinks deeper. This is why so many awakenings begin during times people initially label as low points: retirement, loss, illness, major transitions, moments when the future feels uncertain and the old rhythm no longer applies. These experiences strip away distraction. They remove the scaffolding that once held identity in place. And what remains is not nothing. What remains is awareness itself. At first, this awareness doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives softly, as a subtle noticing. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of being consumed by them. You sense emotions moving through you like weather, rather than defining who you are. You feel moments of calm that don't depend on circumstances. This is not spiritual fantasy. This is a shift in perception. Quantum physics hints at something similar when it suggests that observation changes experience. When consciousness stops reacting automatically and starts witnessing, reality reorganizes itself, not because you force it to, but because you're no longer resisting what is. Stillness changes your energetic signal. When you are constantly pushing, striving, and controlling, your inner field is tense. The body tightens, the mind races, the nervous system stays alert. But when you soften into silence, something extraordinary happens. The system relaxes, the breath deepens, the energy settles into coherence. Like a river that stops trying to flow uphill. You don't have to make the river flow. You only have to stop resisting gravity. This is why forcing change often delays it. Silence teaches you the art of allowing. Allowing does not mean giving up. It means trusting that life has an intelligence beyond your personal effort. In quiet moments, you may notice intuitive insights emerging without logic, gentle realizations, a sense of direction that doesn't come from thinking, but from knowing. These insights are not loud, they don't argue, they don't demand, they simply feel true. This is the voice people call intuition, and it has been speaking to you all along. But intuition does not compete with noise, it waits for silence. As you rest in stillness, you may also notice how much of your identity was built on movement, on being needed, on doing, on proving worth through productivity. When those layers dissolve, there can be fear. The mind may whisper, "If I stop, who am I?" That question is sacred, because beyond the roles, beyond the stories, beyond the past and future, something remains. Presence, not as an idea, but as a living experience. Presence feels spacious, unhurried, gentle. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't chase meaning. It simply is. And in that being, there is a quiet joy that doesn't depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. This is why awakening often feels ordinary, not dramatic, not mystical, just deeply real. You find yourself responding instead of reacting, listening more, needing less, feeling grounded even when life is uncertain. You don't escape the world, you meet it with a different energy. And slowly, life responds, not because you controlled it, but because you aligned with it. When your inner world becomes quiet, the outer world rearranges itself with less resistance. Relationships shift naturally. Opportunities appear without struggle. Situations resolve without force. It feels less like pushing doors open, and more like doors opening when you arrive. This is the intelligence of flow. The greatest misunderstanding is thinking that silence is wasted time, that if you're not doing, you're falling behind. But silence is not inactivity. It is integration. It is recalibration. It is consciousness remembering itself. Awakening does not ask you to leave your life. It asks you to inhabit it fully. And that journey often begins not with a breakthrough, but with a pause, a quiet morning, a slower season, a moment when nothing needs to be fixed. If life has become quiet for you lately, consider this gently. Maybe nothing has gone wrong. Maybe something has finally slowed down enough to be heard. And in that stillness, without effort, without striving, awareness begins to wake up, not as someone new, but as who you have always been. 1. Silence is not a loss. It is a return. Most people are not afraid of silence because it is empty. They are afraid because it removes the noise that keeps the ego comfortable. The ego survives on movement, on stimulation, on constant engagement with something outside of the present moment. It feels safer when there is always something to chase, something to fix, something to react to. In motion, the ego feels alive. In stillness, it feels exposed. That is why silence can feel unsettling at first. When life slows down and the usual distractions fade, the mind does not know where to go. It looks for something to hold on to, some familiar pattern to repeat. Without that movement, many people interpret silence as loss of purpose, loss of direction, loss of identity. But this interpretation comes from misunderstanding what silence truly is. Silence is not the disappearance of life. It is the removal of interference. When the outer noise softens, something very natural begins to happen. You start to hear yourself again, not the loud, anxious voice of conditioned thinking, but the quieter undercurrent that has always been there. It is subtle, and that is why it is so easily drowned out by constant stimulation. Silence does not create this inner voice. It reveals it. In the absence of noise, forgotten parts of you begin to surface, not as memories you force yourself to analyze, but as gentle realizations. You may suddenly notice how tired you have been for years, how much effort you have spent trying to be someone instead of allowing yourself to be, how often you ignored your own signals in order to meet expectations that were never truly yours. Silence brings these truths forward without judgment. It does not accuse. It does not rush. It simply shows you what has been waiting to be seen. This is why silence feels uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. It removes the filters, and when the filters fall away, reality becomes clearer, not harsher, just more honest. Many people assume that silence is a void, a blank space where nothing exists. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence without distraction. It is awareness without commentary. It is consciousness resting in itself. Think of silence as a room that has always been there, but filled with furniture you never needed. When the furniture is removed, the room does not disappear. It becomes spacious, breathable, alive in a new way. In silence, you do not vanish. You return. You return to the part of you that existed before labels, before roles, before stories about who you should be and where you should be going. This return is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with certainty or confidence. It feels simple, almost too simple for the mind to value at first. You may notice yourself sitting quietly, not thinking much, not trying to improve anything, and suddenly realizing that you are okay. Not because life is perfect, but because in that moment, you are not fighting it. There is no urgency, no inner argument, just a calm awareness of being here. That realization is subtle, but it is profound. Awakening does not begin with answers. It begins with presence. When you rest in silence long enough, you start to see how much of your suffering was created by resistance. Resistance to what you felt, resistance to what was happening, resistance to uncertainty. Silence gently dissolves that resistance, not by force, but by removing the need to explain or justify your experience. You begin to notice sensations without labeling them as good or bad. Thoughts arise and pass without being followed. Emotions move through you like weather, changing naturally when they are not suppressed or analyzed. This is not something you do deliberately. It happens when you stop interfering. In that state, something inside you settles. Not the kind of settling that comes from control, but the kind that comes from trust. Trust that you do not need to manage every moment. Trust that awareness itself knows how to hold experience. This is what pure presence feels like. Not excitement, not bliss, just a quiet steadiness that does not depend on circumstances. Silence teaches you that you are not required to perform in order to exist. You are not required to produce in order to be worthy. You are not required to understand everything in order to be at peace. These realizations do not come through effort. They come through stillness. As you become familiar with silence, you may notice that life feels less threatening. Problems still arise, but they do not feel as personal. Challenges still appear, but they are met with clarity rather than panic. You begin to respond instead of react. This shift does not come from learning new strategies. It comes from no longer being pulled away from the present moment by fear of what might happen or regret over what already has. Silence anchors you here, and here, something important becomes clear. You were never broken. You were just distracted. You were never lost. You were just moving too fast to feel where you already were. Silence does not take anything from you. It gives you back to yourself. The more you allow silence to be what it is, the less you need it to change into something else. You stop waiting for it to turn into peace, or insight, or healing. And ironically, that is when those qualities begin to emerge naturally. Awakening begins quietly, not with certainty, but with sincerity. Not with control, but with openness. It begins in the simple recognition of being present without needing a reason. In that recognition, something inside you relaxes and says, without words, I am here. And that moment, as ordinary as it seems, is the doorway. 2. When life slows down, awareness begins to expand. There is a moment in many lives when movement is no longer possible in the way it once was, not because someone chose stillness deliberately, but because life itself applied the brakes. A crisis appears, a loss reshapes the landscape, or a quiet emptiness settles in, where motivation and momentum used to live. These moments rarely arrive with permission, and they almost never feel spiritual at first. They feel inconvenient, disorienting, sometimes even unfair. Yet beneath the surface, something essential is happening, something the ego cannot immediately recognize. The ego experiences these slowdowns as failure. It measures life through progress, speed, achievement, and visible direction. When those markers disappear, it assumes something has gone wrong. The ego asks questions that sound urgent and heavy, wondering why nothing is moving forward, why clarity feels distant, why effort no longer produces the same results. From that perspective, slowing down feels like falling behind, like losing ground in a race that everyone else seems to be running. Awareness sees the same moment very differently. Awareness recognizes the slowdown as an opening rather than a collapse. Where the ego sees interruption, awareness sees invitation. Where the ego feels stripped of control, awareness senses space. This difference in perception is subtle, but it changes everything. The same event that frightens the ego quietly expands consciousness. When life slows down, the automatic patterns that once carried you forward begin to loosen their grip. Habits that kept you functioning without reflection no longer work the way they used to. You notice this when familiar responses feel hollow, when old solutions no longer resolve new problems, when pushing harder only creates more exhaustion instead of results. This breakdown is not a mistake. It is a signal that unconscious living has reached its limit. Unconscious living depends on speed. It thrives on repetition, on doing what has always been done without asking deeper questions. Slowness disrupts this rhythm. It forces pauses where none existed before. In those pauses, awareness has room to surface. You begin to notice how often your reactions were borrowed from the past, shaped by fear, conditioning, or habit rather than present reality. You realize that much of what you called choice was actually reflex. As the pace of life softens, those reflexes lose momentum. You are no longer swept along so quickly that you cannot see what is happening inside you. Space appears between stimulus and response. In that space, awareness grows. You may find yourself pausing before speaking, before deciding, before reacting emotionally. Not because you are trying to be mindful, but because the old urgency is no longer driving you forward. This is where a new layer of consciousness quietly emerges. It does not arrive with dramatic insight or sudden enlightenment. It unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly, like light adjusting at dawn. You begin to see your thoughts as movements rather than commands. You observe emotions without immediately acting on them. You notice bodily sensations that were once drowned out by constant mental activity. This expanded awareness feels unfamiliar at first because it is not goal-oriented. It does not rush toward conclusions or solutions. It simply observes. And in that observation, something profound happens. You stop being pulled so strongly by the past or pushed so aggressively toward the future. The present moment becomes more tangible, more real, more complete. Slowing down exposes the subtle ways you once avoided yourself. You may notice how often you used activity to escape discomfort, how movement filled the space where feeling might have been. When that movement is no longer available, the feelings rise naturally. Sadness, uncertainty, grief, and even relief may surface. Awareness does not judge these emotions. It allows them to be experienced fully, without needing to name them as problems. This allowance is transformative. Emotions that were once suppressed or managed begin to move through you instead of stagnating. You realize that feeling deeply does not destroy you. In fact, resisting feeling was what created tension in the first place. Awareness teaches this lesson gently, through experience rather than instruction. As life continues to slow, you may notice that time itself feels different. Moments stretch. Simple activities become more vivid. You feel the texture of experience rather than rushing past it. This change is not imagined. When the nervous system is no longer constantly activated by urgency, perception sharpens, presence deepens. Life becomes less about getting somewhere and more about inhabiting where you already are. This shift allows a deeper intelligence to guide you. Not the calculating intelligence of the mind, but the intuitive intelligence of awareness. You may find yourself making decisions with less overthinking and more clarity. Answers arise quietly rather than being forced. You trust your sense of timing more than external pressure. This is not passivity, it is alignment. The ego resists this phase because it cannot control it. Awareness, however, thrives here because it does not need control. Awareness functions through attunement. It listens, it responds, it adapts. When life slows, awareness finally has the conditions it needs to operate fully. You begin to recognize that many of your previous struggles were not caused by circumstances, but by the speed at which you moved through them. Slowness reveals what was missed, misunderstood, or ignored. It shows you where effort replaced listening, where force replaced flow, This recognition is not painful when it arises naturally. It feels clarifying, like finally seeing a map after wandering in the dark. A quieter life also softens your relationship with uncertainty. When everything moves quickly, uncertainty feels dangerous because it threatens momentum. When life slows, uncertainty becomes more tolerable. You learn to stay present without needing immediate resolution. This capacity is a sign of expanded awareness. It reflects trust in the unfolding process rather than dependence on control. In this slower rhythm, identity loosens. You no longer define yourself solely by what you do or how much you accomplish. You notice that your sense of self remains even when productivity decreases. This realization is deeply stabilizing. It shows you that your value was never tied to speed or output. Awareness recognizes worth without conditions. As awareness expands, compassion naturally follows. You see others more clearly, not as obstacles or comparisons, but as fellow travelers moving through their own rhythms. Judgment softens, patience grows. You respond from understanding rather than defense. This shift is not moral, it is perceptual. When awareness expands, separation decreases. Life slowing down does not mean life loses meaning. It means meaning changes form. Instead of being measured through milestones, it is felt through presence. Instead of being pursued, it is recognized. You begin to experience fulfillment in ordinary moments, not because they are extraordinary, but because you are fully there for them. This expanded awareness does not eliminate challenges. It changes how challenges are met. Problems no longer feel like threats to identity. They become experiences to engage with thoughtfully. You approach difficulty with curiosity rather than fear. This does not happen overnight. It develops gradually, as awareness continues to deepen through stillness. Eventually, you may realize that the slowdown you once resisted was the very thing that allowed you to wake up, that without it, you might have continued moving unconsciously, mistaking activity for aliveness. Awareness does not regret the pace it once lived at, but it no longer longs for it either. When life slows down, something ancient and wise within you finally has room to breathe, not because you earned it, but because you stopped outrunning it. In that space, awareness expands, naturally, quietly, and steadily, revealing a deeper way of living that was always available, waiting patiently beneath the noise. 3. Silence reveals the voice of the ego. When life becomes quiet, many people expect peace to arrive immediately. But what often appears first is noise of a different kind, not from the outside world, but from within. In silence, old thoughts rise more clearly, not because silence creates them, but because there is finally nothing covering them up. The mind, which once blended into the background of busy days and constant activity, steps forward and begins to speak with surprising intensity. Memories, worries, judgments, regrets, and familiar inner dialogues surface, sometimes louder than expected, sometimes repeating themselves with persistence. This experience can be confusing at first, because it seems to contradict the promise of stillness. Instead of calm, there is mental chatter. Instead of relief, there is restlessness. But this stage is not a failure of silence. It is the beginning of clarity. Silence does not soothe the mind by suppressing it. Silence reveals the mind by removing distraction. What you hear in quiet moments is not new. It is what has been running your life quietly all along. In the presence of stillness, patterns of thought become easier to recognize. You notice how certain narratives repeat themselves, how the same fears return in different forms, how the mind anticipates outcomes before anything actually happens. These thoughts often carry a familiar emotional tone, one that has accompanied you for years. They feel personal, intimate, and convincing. This is the voice of the ego, not as an enemy, but as a habit of identification that has learned to survive through repetition. The ego speaks in the language of time, constantly referring to what went wrong in the past or what might go wrong in the future. It frames life as a series of problems to solve and roles to protect. In silence, this voice becomes easier to hear precisely because it no longer competes with external stimulation. At first, you may assume that these thoughts are you, that they represent your true self speaking honestly. But if you stay present without reacting, something subtle begins to shift. You begin to notice that thoughts arise and fall away on their own. You see that they appear without your permission and disappear without your effort. You may realize that you did not consciously choose most of them. This realization is quiet, but it is profound. For the first time, you sense that you are not identical to the stream of thinking moving through your mind. This recognition marks the beginning of separation. Not separation from life, but separation from identification with thought. It does not require rejection or suppression. It requires awareness. The moment you see a thought instead of being absorbed by it, a small distance appears. In that distance, freedom begins to grow. The ego resists this distance because it depends on identification. It needs you to believe that its voice is your voice, that its fears are your fears, that its stories define reality. When awareness observes the ego without judgment, the ego loses some of its authority. Not because it is attacked, but because it is seen clearly. This is why observation is more powerful than resistance. When you resist a thought, you give it energy. When you argue with it, you stay engaged. When you try to silence it forcefully, it often grows louder. Observation, on the other hand, allows the thought to complete its cycle without interference. Awareness watches the thought arise, express itself, and dissolve naturally. This process requires patience. At first, observation feels awkward because the habit of reacting is deeply ingrained. The mind wants to follow every story, fix every problem, defend every position. But as awareness strengthens, observation becomes more natural. You notice thoughts without needing to answer them. You let emotions pass through without naming them as threats. You create space where there was once only reaction. In this space, identity begins to loosen. You no longer define yourself solely by what you think or feel in any given moment. You recognize that thoughts are experiences, not definitions. Emotions are movements, not identities. This understanding is not intellectual. It is experiential. It arises through repeated moments of noticing without judgment. As this separation deepens, something important becomes clear. The ego is not wrong. It is simply limited. It was designed to navigate survival, not to provide peace. When you expect the ego to offer fulfillment or certainty, disappointment follows. When you see the ego as a tool rather than a master, balance returns. Silence allows this relationship to change gently. Instead of fighting the ego, you learn to listen without obeying. You hear its concerns without letting them dictate your actions. You recognize its fears without becoming afraid. This shift creates a sense of inner stability that does not depend on controlling thoughts or eliminating emotions. Awareness grows stronger as the observer position becomes familiar. You find yourself noticing moments of choice where none seemed to exist before. A pause appears between impulse and action. In that pause, clarity emerges. You respond from presence rather than habit. This is not something you force. It happens naturally when awareness is given space. The experience of silence also reveals how much of the ego's voice is conditioned by the past. You may see how certain thoughts echo old experiences, how fears reflect previous disappointments, how judgments were learned rather than discovered. Seeing this does not require analysis. Awareness recognizes patterns effortlessly when it is not distracted. As these patterns become visible, their grip weakens. You realize that many of the stories you believed about yourself were never questioned, simply because you were too busy to question them. Silence offers the opportunity to see these stories clearly, without needing to rewrite them or replace them. Seeing is enough. The ego often reacts to this clarity with discomfort. It may intensify its narratives or create new ones. This is not a setback. It is a sign that awareness is present. Each time a thought is seen rather than followed, awareness strengthens. Over time, the ego's voice becomes less dominant, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer mistaken for truth. In this process, awareness does not become detached or cold. On the contrary, compassion deepens. When you see your own mental patterns clearly, you begin to understand others more easily. Judgment softens, patience grows. You recognize that everyone is navigating their own internal dialogue, often without realizing it. Silence teaches this understanding gently. It does not demand perfection. It invites honesty. It shows you that awakening is not about eliminating the ego, but about relating to it from a place of awareness rather than identification. This relationship transforms inner conflict into inner clarity. As awareness continues to deepen, you may notice moments of quiet presence where thoughts fade into the background without effort. These moments are not forced. They arise naturally when observation becomes effortless. In these moments, there is a sense of being without commentary, of existing without explanation. This presence feels grounded and real, not elevated or mystical. This is the essence of awakening through silence. Not the absence of thought, but the recognition that you are not confined by it. Not the disappearance of the ego, but the freedom that comes from seeing it clearly. Awareness awakens when there is distance, and silence provides that distance without struggle. Through this gentle process, silence becomes a teacher rather than a challenge. It shows you how the mind operates, how identification forms, and how freedom emerges naturally through observation. In learning to sit with the ego's voice without resistance, you discover a deeper voice beneath it, one that does not speak in words, but in presence. And in that presence, you find a sense of home that was never truly lost, only obscured by noise. 4. The energy field changes when you stop trying. There comes a point in many inner journeys when effort quietly reveals its limits. Not because effort is wrong, but because it has been carrying a weight it was never meant to hold. For most of our lives, we are taught that progress requires pushing, that change demands force, and that results come only through constant trying. This belief shapes not only our actions, but our inner state. We learn to tense ourselves toward the future, to lean forward psychologically, always reaching for something that feels just out of grasp. Over time, this leaning becomes so familiar that we mistake it for responsibility or strength. Yet beneath this habitual effort, something subtle is happening in the field of energy that surrounds and permeates us. Quantum science suggests that reality responds not only to action, but to the state from which action arises. Energy does not merely react to what we do. It responds to how we are being while we do it. When the inner state is tight, anxious, or forceful, that tension imprints itself on the field. When the inner state softens, the field reorganizes accordingly. This is difficult for the ego to accept, because the ego believes that control equals safety. It assumes that relaxing effort means losing direction, that letting go means giving up. But there is a profound difference between surrender and collapse. Surrender is not resignation. It is alignment with a deeper intelligence that does not require strain. When you stop trying in the way the ego tries, something remarkable begins to unfold. The nervous system relaxes. The breath deepens without instruction. The body releases subtle layers of tension that have been held unconsciously for years. This physical shift is not separate from consciousness. It is consciousness expressing itself through the body. As tension dissolves, the energetic signal you emit becomes clearer, steadier, and more coherent. In this relaxed state, vibration naturally harmonizes. You are no longer pushing against the current of life. You are allowing yourself to float with it. This does not mean passivity or inaction. It means that action arises from presence rather than pressure. Movement comes from listening rather than forcing. Decisions emerge from clarity rather than urgency. The field responds to this shift immediately, though not always in dramatic ways. Interactions feel less strained. Timing feels more natural. Obstacles that once demanded struggle soften or dissolve altogether. This is not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because your relationship with it changed. When you stop meeting life with resistance, life stops meeting you with friction. Allowing creates flow because it removes internal opposition. Most resistance is not between you and the world, but within you. It is the quiet argument against what is happening, the belief that reality should be different before you can relax. When that argument fades, energy that was once trapped in tension becomes available for presence, creativity, and insight. This is the meeting point between letting go and receiving. It is where effort gives way to openness. You are no longer trying to make something happen, yet you are deeply available for what is happening. In this state, receiving does not feel like taking. It feels like recognizing what has already been offered. Many people misunderstand this shift and assume that stopping effort means abandoning goals or desires. In truth, It refines them. Desires no longer arise from lack, but from resonance. Goals are no longer driven by fear, but by alignment. You move toward what feels alive rather than away from what feels wrong. This subtle change transforms the entire energetic landscape of your life. Quantum principles hint that observation influences outcome, but observation is not passive watching. It is presence without interference. When you observe your life without constant judgment or manipulation, you allow patterns to reveal themselves. You see where energy flows easily and where it contracts. This awareness guides action more effectively than force ever could. As you practice not trying in the old way, trust becomes essential. Trust not in outcomes, but in process. Trust that you do not need to micromanage reality in order to participate fully. Trust that intelligence exists beyond personal will. This trust is not blind. It grows through experience. Each time you relax effort and notice life responding with ease, confidence deepens. Life's responses become gentler because you are no longer bracing against it. Conversations soften. Decisions feel less heavy. Even challenges are met with steadiness rather than panic. You realize that effort was never the source of strength you thought it was. Presence is. This does not mean effort disappears entirely. It means effort becomes intelligent. Instead of pushing, you apply energy where it naturally wants to go. Instead of forcing solutions, you allow clarity to guide action. Effort becomes an extension of awareness rather than a substitute for it. At this stage, you may notice a shift in timing. Things unfold neither too quickly nor too slowly. They arrive when you are ready to meet them. This sense of timing is not coincidence. It reflects coherence between your inner state and the larger field of life. When resistance dissolves, synchronization increases. You may also notice that rest becomes productive in ways effort never was. Insights arise in still moments. Creativity flows when pressure releases. Answers come when questions are no longer demanded aggressively. This is not magic. It is the natural intelligence of a relaxed system. The ego often fears this relaxation because it feels unfamiliar. It may warn that without constant effort, everything will fall apart. But lived experience tells a different story. When effort relaxes into presence, life often becomes more orderly, not less. Energy organizes itself efficiently when it is not obstructed by fear. This is where receiving becomes possible. Not receiving as acquisition, but receiving as recognition. You begin to notice support that was always there but previously overlooked. You recognize opportunities that align naturally, instead of forcing mismatched ones. You feel gratitude without needing justification. The meeting point between letting go and receiving is subtle. It cannot be forced. It arrives when you stop insisting on control and start trusting awareness. In that meeting point, energy moves freely. Life feels responsive rather than resistant. You feel carried rather than burdened. This shift does not make life perfect. It makes life workable. It replaces struggle with cooperation. It replaces tension with attentiveness. You still participate fully, but without the exhausting belief that everything depends on your effort alone. When you stop trying in the old way, you discover that you were never meant to push life into shape. You were meant to align with it. And alignment does not require strain. It requires presence, openness, and the courage to relax into what is already unfolding. In this relaxed alignment, energy flows naturally, life responds gently, and receiving becomes as effortless as breathing, not because you earned it, but because you finally stopped blocking it. 5. Silence is where intuition speaks. There is a quiet intelligence within every human being that has never needed to raise its voice. It does not argue, persuade, or demand attention. It does not compete with fear or try to overpower doubt. Intuition simply waits. It waits for the conditions in which it can be heard. And those conditions are almost always simple, slow, and silent. In a world that rewards volume and speed, this kind of intelligence is easily overlooked, not because it is weak, but because it is subtle. Most people expect guidance to arrive with certainty and urgency, as if truth must announce itself loudly to be trusted. Yet intuition moves in the opposite direction. It speaks in soft impressions, gentle nudges, and quiet clarity. When the mind is busy debating and predicting, intuition remains in the background, not offended, not absent, just unheard. Silence creates the space where its voice becomes noticeable. Only in stillness do you begin to recognize how often intuition has already been present. You may recall moments when you sensed something before understanding it, when a decision felt right long before it made sense on paper. Those moments were not accidents. They were glimpses of inner wisdom briefly breaking through mental noise. Silence does not create intuition. It removes what has been covering it. When the environment grows quiet and the mind settles, a different mode of listening becomes available. You are no longer scanning for answers or analyzing outcomes. You are simply receptive. In that receptive state, intuition emerges naturally. It does not feel dramatic. It feels obvious in retrospect, like recognizing a familiar face in a crowd once the crowd thins. This form of knowing does not rely on linear thinking. It does not build arguments or require justification. It arrives as a sense of alignment or unease, a quiet yes or a gentle no. Often, intuition communicates through the body rather than words, through sensations of openness or contraction, ease or resistance. When you are still enough to notice these signals, decision-making changes fundamentally. Wise decisions do not come from thinking harder. They come from creating inner space. The mind, when overworked, tends to repeat patterns. It references the past and projects the future, attempting to calculate safety. Intuition, however, operates in the present moment. It responds to what is actually happening rather than what is imagined. Silence supports this present-centered awareness. As the mind quiets, your attention moves out of thought and into direct experience. You notice how certain choices feel in your body. You sense the energy of situations before committing to them. This sensitivity is not emotional reactivity. It is attunement. Attunement requires trust. Not blind trust, but experiential trust. You learn to trust intuition by listening to it in small ways. You follow a gentle nudge to rest rather than push. You choose a conversation that feels honest rather than one that feels obligatory. Over time, you notice that these small choices lead to coherence rather than chaos. Inner wisdom is always present because it is not something you acquire. It is something you remember. It emerges when the layers of mental noise thin out. Silence allows this remembering to occur without effort. You are not reaching inward to find something missing. You are noticing what has always been there. Many people confuse intuition with impulse or desire. The difference becomes clear in silence. Impulse is often urgent and emotionally charged. It pushes. Intuition is calm and patient. It does not demand immediate action. It remains consistent even when emotions fluctuate. In stillness, this distinction becomes easier to recognize. As you spend time in silence, you may notice that intuition becomes more accessible, not because it becomes stronger, but because you become quieter. Your sensitivity increases. You notice subtleties you once ignored. This sensitivity is not vulnerability in the negative sense. It is awareness refined through presence. Silence also changes your relationship with uncertainty. Intuition does not eliminate uncertainty. It helps you move within it without panic. You may not see the entire path, but you sense the next step. This is often enough. Life unfolds through small alignments rather than grand plans. Listening deeply requires humility. It means admitting that not everything can be solved through analysis. It means acknowledging that wisdom does not always speak in words. Silence invites this humility naturally. It softens the need to control and replaces it with curiosity. In this deeper listening, you may realize that intuition has been guiding you even in difficult times. It may not have prevented pain, but it often guided you through it. It nudged you toward growth when comfort would have kept you stagnant. Silence allows you to see these patterns clearly, without rewriting the past or blaming yourself. Intuition also deepens compassion. As you learn to listen to yourself without judgment, you begin to listen to others more openly. Conversations become less about responding and more about understanding. This shift transforms relationships. You respond from presence rather than defense. The practice of silence is not about withdrawing from life. It is about engaging with life from a deeper place. Intuition does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. It helps you act with integrity rather than fear. It guides you toward choices that align with who you are becoming, rather than who you were conditioned to be. Over time, intuition becomes less mysterious and more practical. It informs everyday decisions as much as major ones. It influences how you pace yourself, how you set boundaries, how you respond to challenges. This integration is natural. It does not require rituals or special conditions. It requires attention. Silence teaches you that you do not need more information. You need more presence. When presence deepens, wisdom surfaces. You realize that many answers you sought externally were already available internally, waiting for the noise to subside. In this quiet relationship with intuition, trust grows slowly and steadily. You learn that listening deeply does not lead you astray. It leads you home, not to certainty, but to alignment, not to control, but to coherence. Silence becomes a companion rather than a void. It is the space where intuition speaks, not in declarations, but in gentle truths that guide you step by step. And as you learn to hear that quiet voice, you discover that it has always known the way, patiently waiting for you to listen. 6. When the roles fall away, your true nature is revealed. For most of our lives, we learn to understand ourselves through the roles we occupy, often without realizing how deeply we have merged with them. We introduce ourselves through titles, responsibilities, relationships, and achievements, slowly building an identity that feels solid because it is constantly reinforced by the world around us. These roles are not false, but they are partial. They serve a function, yet over time they begin to feel like definitions rather than expressions. We forget that they are things we do, not what we are. This identification with roles is rarely questioned while life is loud and fast. When days are filled with obligations and expectations, there is little room to ask deeper questions about identity. The role becomes the reference point for worth, direction, and belonging. When things are going well, the role feels like protection. When things fall apart, the role feels like pressure. Either way, the sense of self remains tied to performance. Silence has a quiet way of loosening this attachment. When the noise fades and the usual demands soften, the roles lose their urgency. There is less need to prove competence, to meet standards, to maintain an image. In that absence, something unexpected happens. The roles begin to dissolve, not dramatically, but gently, like mist evaporating in the morning light. At first, this can feel unsettling. Without the familiar structure of identity, the mind asks uncomfortable questions. Who am I if I am not producing, achieving, or being needed in the same way? What remains when no one is watching, expecting, or evaluating? These questions arise naturally when silence removes the scaffolding that once held identity in place. The ego responds to this uncertainty by trying to reconstruct itself quickly. It may reach for new labels, new purposes, new ways to define value. But silence does not rush this process. It invites you to stay with the not knowing, to resist the urge to replace one role with another, to rest in the space where the question remains unanswered. In that space, something profound becomes apparent. There is still awareness. There is still presence. There is still a sense of being that does not depend on any role. You notice that even without defining yourself, you continue to exist fully. You breathe, you feel, you perceive. Life moves through you effortlessly, without needing a title. This realization shifts the center of identity. Instead of asking who you must be, attention turns toward what is already here. There is no longer a need to construct a self. There is a simple recognition of being. This recognition is not abstract. It is felt directly as presence. Silence supports this recognition because it removes the constant reinforcement of external identity. Without feedback from the world, the mind cannot cling as easily to images of self. What remains is raw experience, unfiltered by roles. This experience feels intimate and honest. It does not require explanation. In this state, the question of who you are loses its urgency. It no longer feels necessary to answer it. There is relief in not needing to define yourself. You notice that identity was never meant to be a fixed point. It was meant to be a fluid expression of life, moving through different forms. As roles fall away, you may notice a deep sense of freedom emerging. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be without pretense. There is no longer a need to maintain an image or defend a position. You respond to situations authentically rather than strategically. This authenticity is not something you perform. It arises naturally when there is nothing to protect. This freedom feels quiet and grounded. It does not seek attention. It does not announce itself. It is felt as ease within yourself. You move through interactions without carrying the weight of expectation. You listen more openly. You speak more honestly. You allow yourself to be seen as you are, rather than as you think you should be. Silence reveals that roles were never the source of fulfillment. They were expressions of energy, not its origin. When you stop clinging to them, you do not lose meaning. Meaning shifts from external validation to internal coherence. You feel aligned when actions arise from presence rather than obligation. This shift also transforms relationships. When you are no longer defined by roles, you meet others more directly. You relate as a human being rather than as a function. Conversations become more genuine. Connection deepens. You are no longer trying to fulfill expectations or extract validation. You are simply present. There is humility in this presence. Without roles to lean on, you meet life with openness rather than authority. You acknowledge uncertainty without shame. You admit not knowing without fear. This humility is not weakness. It is strength, rooted in authenticity. As silence continues to deepen, you may notice that even the role of seeker begins to dissolve. The idea that you must become something else to be complete loses its grip. You realize that what you were seeking through improvement and growth was already present beneath the layers of identity. This realization does not end growth. It transforms it. Growth becomes an unfolding rather than a pursuit. You evolve not by striving to change who you are, but by allowing what is already true to express itself more fully. This process feels natural rather than forced. The freedom that emerges here is subtle but profound. It is the freedom from self-concept, the freedom from constantly measuring yourself against an internal standard, the freedom from the belief that you must earn your place in existence. In this freedom, life feels lighter. Challenges still arise, but they are not interpreted as threats to identity. Success and failure lose their power to define you. You engage fully, but without attachment to outcome. This balance creates resilience that does not depend on circumstance. Silence teaches this lesson gently. It does not strip roles away violently. It allows them to fade as their necessity diminishes. You come to see that roles were useful tools, not prisons. You can step into them when needed and step out of them when they no longer serve. This flexibility is the essence of true freedom. You are no longer trapped by identity, nor are you disconnected from the world. You participate without losing yourself. You contribute without defining yourself by contribution. You belong without needing to fit a mold. When there is no longer a question of who you must be, there is space to experience who you are. This experience is simple, immediate, and deeply satisfying. It does not depend on approval or achievement. It rests in presence. This is the deepest freedom silence offers. Not escape from life, but release from false identity. Not detachment from the world, but intimacy with existence. When the roles fall away, what remains is not emptiness. It is being itself, quiet, steady, and complete. 7. Awakening is not loud, not dramatic. Awakening, in my experience, does not arrive like a thunderclap tearing through the sky, and it does not announce itself with fireworks or emotional extremes, because real transformation rarely needs noise to prove its presence. Most of us are unconsciously waiting for a moment that looks impressive from the outside, something intense enough to justify all the pain we have carried. Yet what actually comes is far quieter, almost disappointingly simple, as if life were saying that truth never needed drama to begin with. It often begins as a gentle recognition, rather than a shocking event. A soft inner knowing that something fundamental has shifted even though nothing obvious has changed in your external circumstances. You may still wake up in the same body, walk into the same room, face the same responsibilities, but there is a subtle sense that you are no longer standing inside the story in the same way. You are aware of it, and that awareness alone changes everything. There is a calm that appears without a clear reason, Not the kind that depends on things going well or problems being solved, but a quiet steadiness that remains even when uncertainty is present. This calm does not argue with reality, and it does not demand that life behave differently in order for you to feel okay. It simply exists. Like a deep breath you did not know you were holding suddenly releasing itself. One of the earliest signs is that your reactions soften, not because you are trying to be more spiritual or more controlled, but because something inside you no longer feels threatened in the same way. Situations that once pulled you into defensiveness or urgency now meet a wider inner space. And in that space, you find the freedom to pause. That pause becomes more valuable than any clever response, because within it lies choice. Presence quietly replaces compulsion, and you notice that you are listening more than you are preparing to speak, feeling more than you are trying to fix, and witnessing your inner movements instead of immediately identifying with them. This shift is subtle, yet it carries a strength that force could never produce, because it is rooted in clarity rather than effort. Awakening unfolds as a series of small recognitions that gently reorient your life, like a compass slowly aligning itself north without you pushing the needle. You begin to sense when you are acting from fear rather than truth, and instead of judging yourself for it, you simply see it. That seeing dissolves much of the struggle that once accompanied self-improvement, because awareness itself begins to do the work. There is a growing sense of intimacy with ordinary moments, as if life were no longer something you are trying to get through on the way to something better. Washing your hands, sitting in silence, watching light move across a room, all become complete experiences rather than filler between important events. Nothing special happens, and yet nothing feels missing. The dramatic stories of awakening often suggest that everything changes at once, but what truly happens is that your relationship to change itself transforms. You become less invested in controlling outcomes and more attuned to responding from presence. And this shift quietly rewires the way energy moves through your life. What once felt heavy begins to feel workable, and what once felt urgent begins to feel negotiable. You may notice that you no longer need to convince others of what you have discovered, because the truth you are touching is not something that can be argued into existence. It expresses itself through how you listen, how you move, and how you allow life to unfold without excessive resistance. This natural humility is not a loss of power, but a return to it. The absence of drama can feel confusing at first, especially if you expected awakening to validate your suffering with a grand reward. Yet over time, you begin to see that the quietness is the gift, because it allows the nervous system to settle and the heart to open without overwhelm. Healing happens in safety, not in spectacle. You become less interested in labeling your experience and more interested in living it, recognizing that no word can capture what it feels like to be at ease inside yourself. The mind relaxes its grip on explanation, and in that relaxation, wisdom begins to express itself naturally through your actions rather than your concepts. There is a deeper patience with yourself and with others, born not from moral effort, but from understanding how unconsciousness operates. You see that most human behavior is driven by unexamined fear and inherited conditioning. And this insight softens your judgments without making you passive. Compassion becomes practical, grounded, and quietly firm. Awakening does not remove challenges, but it changes how challenges are held within you, so that even difficulty is met with a wider awareness that can contain it. Pain still arises, yet it no longer defines your identity, because you are no longer collapsed into the experience. You feel fully, but you are not lost. Over time, you realize that the most profound transformation is the absence of inner conflict, the end of the constant argument with what is. This does not mean you stop acting or caring, but that your actions come from clarity rather than resistance. Life begins to feel like a conversation instead of a battle. The subtle nature of awakening makes it sustainable, because it integrates gently into daily life, rather than pulling you away from it. You do not have to abandon your humanity to touch truth. You only have to meet it more honestly. In this way, awakening becomes less of an event and more of a way of being. Eventually, you may look back and realize that the shift you were waiting for has already happened, quietly, patiently, without ceremony. The peace you sought did not arrive as an extraordinary experience, but as an ordinary freedom. the freedom to be present without needing life to be different. And in that simplicity, you understand why awakening was never meant to be loud, because what is real does not need to announce itself. It only needs to be recognized, and once it is, it continues to unfold in its own quiet, enduring way, reshaping your life from the inside out, without ever demanding applause. 8. Life begins to reorganize when you stop resisting. There comes a quiet turning point when you realize that much of your exhaustion did not come from life itself, but from the constant inner resistance you carried against it, the subtle tension of wishing the present moment were something other than what it is. When that resistance softens, not through force but through understanding, life begins to rearrange itself in ways that feel almost intelligent, as though it had been waiting for your cooperation all along. Stopping resistance does not mean giving up or becoming passive, and it certainly does not mean approving of everything that happens, but it does mean ending the internal war with reality as it is right now. In that ending, a tremendous amount of energy is freed, energy that was previously locked in complaint, fear, and mental argument. This released energy naturally returns to the flow of life, where it can finally be used for clarity, creativity, and genuine movement forward. When you no longer push against the present moment, the current of life begins to feel smoother, not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer standing sideways in the river. You are facing the direction of the flow, feeling its movement rather than bracing against it, and this subtle alignment changes how every situation meets you. What once felt like constant friction now feels like guidance, even when the path is not immediately clear. As resistance dissolves, relationships begin to shift in ways that may surprise you, because many connections were held together by unspoken expectations, fear of loss, or the need to be seen in a certain way. When you stop forcing people to meet your inner demands, some relationships naturally soften and deepen, while others quietly fall away, without drama. This is not loss in the traditional sense, but a reorganization that reflects a more honest resonance. Opportunities also begin to appear differently, not necessarily more frequently, but more accurately aligned with who you are becoming rather than who you were trying to be. You find yourself less tempted by paths that once promised validation or security at the cost of inner tension. Instead, you are drawn to situations that feel clean, spacious, and quietly supportive, even if they look simpler on the surface. This reordering does not happen because you are controlling outcomes more effectively, but because you have stopped interfering with the intelligence already present in life. Control was never the source of stability, only the illusion of it. And as that illusion loosens, a deeper trust begins to take its place. This trust is not naive optimism, but a grounded confidence in your ability to respond to whatever arises without losing yourself. When control relaxes, you notice that decisions become clearer without requiring endless analysis, because they are no longer filtered through fear of getting it wrong. You listen more closely to what feels aligned rather than what looks impressive, and this listening guides you with a surprising precision. Life responds to this clarity by meeting you halfway, opening doors that effort alone could never unlock. The body often reflects this shift before the mind fully understands it, as tension patterns soften and breathing deepens without conscious effort. There is a sense of being more at home in yourself, less driven by urgency, and more available to the present moment as it unfolds. This embodied ease becomes the foundation from which wiser action naturally emerges. You begin to see that resistance was never protecting you, but keeping you stuck in repetitive patterns that mirrored your inner conflict. As that conflict resolves, even partially, the outer patterns lose their momentum. Problems that once seemed persistent either resolve themselves or reveal new ways of being approached, ways that do not require force but invite cooperation. Synchronicity, often misunderstood as something mystical, reveals itself simply as the natural result of alignment. When your inner state is no longer contradicting your outer actions, you show up differently, speak differently, and listen differently. And the world responds to these changes with subtle but consistent adjustments. Life feels less like something happening to you, and more like something happening with you. This does not mean that everything becomes comfortable or predictable, but that you are no longer wasting energy fighting the shape of the moment. Discomfort is met with curiosity rather than avoidance, and uncertainty is held with patience rather than panic. In this openness, solutions emerge that could not be seen from within resistance. There is a growing appreciation for timing, for the way things unfold when they are ready, rather than when the mind demands resolution. You stop pushing for answers before the questions have fully formed, and in this restraint, understanding ripens naturally. What arrives feels earned, not through struggle but through presence. Life's reorganization is often gentle and gradual, almost imperceptible day by day, yet unmistakable when you look back. You notice that you are no longer surrounded by the same chaos, the same repetitive dramas, the same sense of being out of sync with your own values. This change did not come from fixing yourself, but from allowing yourself to be where you are without resistance. As alignment deepens, you recognize that harmony is not something you create by arranging external circumstances perfectly, but something you allow by meeting each moment honestly. This honesty removes the need for constant self-defense, making room for authentic engagement with life as it is. In that engagement, meaning reveals itself quietly. You begin to trust that you do not have to push life into coherence, because coherence is its natural state when you stop fragmenting it with inner opposition. This trust does not make you complacent, but it does make you precise, acting only when action is truly called for, and resting when stillness is the wiser choice. In this state of resonance, effort is replaced by participation, and striving gives way to responsiveness. You are no longer trying to impose a vision on life, but allowing life to express itself through you in ways that feel both grounded and alive. This is not surrender as defeat, but surrender as intelligence, recognizing itself. Over time, the question shifts from how to make life work to how to stay aligned with what is already working beneath the surface. You see that life has been offering support all along, waiting for you to stop pushing against it long enough to notice. When you do, the sense of isolation fades, replaced by a quiet companionship with existence itself. In this companionship, you find a steadiness that does not depend on circumstances lining up perfectly, because it is rooted in your willingness to meet reality without resistance. Life continues to change, as it always will, but you move with it rather than against it. And in that movement, everything begins to find its place, not through control, but through alignment. 9. Stillness nourishes. Trust in the flow. There is a form of trust that cannot be taught, cannot be borrowed from books, and cannot be sustained by positive thinking alone, because it is not an idea you adopt but a knowing that grows quietly inside you when stillness becomes familiar. This trust does not come from everything working out the way you want, but from discovering, again and again, that you do not need to make every detail of life happen through effort, tension, or constant mental control. At first, the mind resists this idea fiercely, because it has been trained to believe that survival depends on vigilance, planning, and staying one step ahead of uncertainty. The ego whispers that if you relax, everything will fall apart, that if you stop pushing, you will be left behind. Yet stillness gently reveals a different truth, one that only becomes visible when you are no longer bracing yourself against life. In moments of genuine quiet, not the forced silence of avoidance, but the living stillness of presence, you begin to sense that life has been moving long before you learned how to manage it. Your heart has been beating without your instructions, your breath has been flowing without your supervision, and countless processes have been unfolding in perfect coordination beyond the reach of your conscious mind. This realization does not make you smaller, but places you back into a larger intelligence that you were never separate from. Trust begins to grow when you see that effort alone has never been the source of your most meaningful moments. The deepest connections, the unexpected opportunities, the insights that changed your direction, often arrived when you were not forcing them into existence. Stillness allows you to recognize this pattern not as coincidence, but as the natural response of life, when you are receptive rather than resistant. The intelligence of life is not abstract or mystical, but practical and immediate, expressed through timing, synchronicity, and the quiet sense of knowing when to act and when to wait. When you slow down enough to feel it, you realize that this intelligence does not need your anxiety to function. In fact, it works more clearly when you are relaxed, because relaxation removes the noise that drowns out subtle guidance. As you spend more time in stillness, trust shifts from a hopeful belief into an embodied experience. You notice that when you do less internally, when you stop arguing with the moment, situations often resolve themselves with less friction. Support shows up in ordinary ways, through conversations, insights, or shifts in perspective that arrive naturally, rather than being chased. This kind of trust does not make you passive, but it changes the quality of your action. Instead of acting from fear of lack or fear of failure, you respond from a grounded sense of alignment. Actions become simpler, more precise, and less exhausting, because they are no longer driven by the need to control outcomes. You do what is yours to do, and you allow the rest to unfold. Stillness teaches you that you are not alone in carrying the weight of your life. There is a subtle partnership at work, one that becomes visible only when you stop trying to dominate the process. In this partnership, your role is not to micromanage reality, but to remain present, honest, and responsive to what is actually happening, rather than what you fear might happen. Over time, fear begins to lose its grip, not because you have defeated it, but because it is no longer being fed by constant mental projection. Fear thrives on imagined futures and unresolved pasts, and stillness gently anchors you in the only place where life is actually occurring. From this anchor point, fear is seen as a passing sensation rather than a command that must be obeyed. You start to trust that even when clarity is not immediately available, it will arrive when it is needed. This trust allows you to stay open during periods of uncertainty without collapsing into panic or rushing into premature decisions. Waiting no longer feels like stagnation, but like listening, an active form of presence that respects the natural rhythm of unfolding. As trust deepens, you realize that life does not require your constant intervention to be meaningful. Meaning emerges through participation, through showing up fully for what is here, rather than through endless striving for what is not yet. This realization brings a profound sense of relief, as though a heavy burden has quietly slipped from your shoulders. Stillness also reveals that trust is not about expecting everything to go smoothly, but about knowing that you can meet whatever arises without abandoning yourself. This confidence does not come from predicting outcomes, but from being grounded enough to respond with clarity and compassion. Life feels less threatening when you trust your capacity to be present within it. The more you rest in stillness, the more you notice how often life has already been supporting you in ways you overlooked while you were busy trying to control it. Small graces become visible, moments of ease, unexpected help, quiet beauty, woven into ordinary days. Gratitude arises naturally, not as a practice, but as a response to seeing clearly. This experiential trust reshapes your relationship with effort. You still act, plan, and create, but without the underlying tension that once accompanied every step. Effort becomes an expression of engagement rather than a defense against fear. You move because something feels alive to move toward, not because you are running from what you fear might happen if you stop. Gradually, you sense that life is not something you need to conquer or outsmart, but something you are already participating in. The flow you once tried to manage reveals itself as a current you can lean into, trusting that it knows how to carry you even when the destination is not yet visible. In this trust, stillness is no longer something you visit occasionally, but a quiet background presence that informs how you meet each moment. You carry it with you into conversations, decisions, and challenges, allowing it to soften your reactions and widen your perspective. From this place, fear no longer dominates, because it is no longer mistaken for wisdom. What remains is a calm attentiveness, a readiness to respond rather than react, and a deepening confidence that you do not have to force life to work. Life, when met with openness and presence, reveals itself as a cooperative movement rather than a battlefield. And in that realization, trust stops being something you try to cultivate and becomes something you live. 10. Awakening is living deeply, not living more. At a certain point on this path, something very quiet yet very decisive becomes clear. And that is the realization that awakening is not about adding more experiences to your life, but about inhabiting the life you already have, with greater depth, honesty, and presence. For a long time, Many of us believed that fulfillment would come from doing more, achieving more, becoming more. Yet what we eventually discover is that depth was never missing because of lack of activity, but because we were rarely fully here for what was already unfolding. Living deeply does not mean withdrawing from the world or rejecting ordinary responsibilities, but it does mean releasing the habit of rushing through moments as if they were obstacles on the way to something better. When presence replaces urgency, even simple activities take on a different texture, and you notice that life does not need to be dramatic to feel meaningful. Depth arises naturally when attention is no longer divided. You may find yourself doing fewer things, not out of resignation or loss of ambition, but because the compulsion to fill every space with activity has softened. In this softening, energy that was once scattered begins to gather, and whatever you do choose to engage with receives your full presence. There is less strain, less inner negotiation, and more sincerity in your actions. Each moment becomes vivid in a way that does not rely on excitement, because you are actually meeting it, rather than mentally passing through it. Sounds feel clearer, conversations feel more intimate, and even silence feels alive rather than empty. This aliveness is not manufactured, but revealed when you stop treating the present as a means to an end. Joy, in this way of living, is no longer dependent on peak experiences or external validation. It appears quietly in ordinary moments, in the warmth of a cup held in your hands, in the rhythm of your breath, in the shared pause between words. This joy is simple, but it is also deeply nourishing, because it does not ask you to become someone else in order to access it. You begin to understand that fulfillment does not come from escaping the world, but from being fully present within it. Awakening does not ask you to abandon your human life, but to live it without the constant overlay of resistance, comparison, and expectation. You are still in the world, but no longer lost in it. This new way of living brings a profound sense of ease, because you are no longer trying to extract meaning from life through effort. Meaning reveals itself through attention. When you give yourself fully to what is here, even mundane tasks carry a quiet dignity, and even challenges feel workable rather than overwhelming. Living deeply also means allowing yourself to feel fully without immediately trying to fix or interpret your emotions. Feelings are met as part of the living moment, not as problems to be solved. This openness creates a natural resilience, because emotions are no longer suppressed or dramatized, but integrated into the flow of experience. You may notice that time itself feels different, not because it moves more slowly, but because you are no longer racing ahead of it mentally. Moments feel complete, and days feel less fragmented, even if their external structure has not changed. This sense of completeness reduces the hunger for constant stimulation, because you are no longer trying to escape the present. Living deeply also reshapes your relationships, as you listen more fully and speak more honestly, without the need to perform or impress. Presence becomes the foundation of connection, and from this foundation, interactions feel less draining and more authentic. You are no longer relating through roles alone, but through shared humanity. There is a growing appreciation for simplicity, not as a moral stance, but as a natural consequence of clarity. When you see clearly, excess falls away on its own. You need fewer distractions to feel alive, fewer explanations to feel secure, and fewer accomplishments to feel worthy. Life feels lighter, not because it is easier, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary weight. Awakening reveals that depth is available in every situation, not just in moments labeled as spiritual or special. Washing dishes, waiting in line, sitting with uncertainty, all become opportunities for presence rather than interruptions to it. Nothing is excluded from awareness, and therefore, nothing is wasted. You also realize that living deeply does not mean withdrawing from action, but acting from a different place. Actions arise from clarity rather than compulsion, from alignment rather than fear. You still participate in the world, but your participation is informed by presence rather than driven by restlessness. This way of living dissolves the false division between the sacred and the ordinary. Life itself becomes the practice, and presence becomes the teacher. There is no need to constantly seek guidance, because guidance emerges naturally from attentive listening to what is already here. As you live more deeply, the need to define yourself through labels and narratives softens. You are less concerned with who you are supposed to be, and more engaged with how you are actually showing up. Identity becomes flexible, responsive, and secondary to the living experience itself. You begin to trust that depth, not quantity, is what nourishes the soul. One moment fully lived carries more meaning than many moments passed through unconsciously. This trust changes how you measure your life, shifting the focus from accumulation to appreciation. Living deeply also brings a quiet courage, because you are no longer avoiding discomfort through distraction. You meet life directly, with openness and steadiness, trusting that presence can hold both joy and pain without collapse. This courage is gentle, not forceful, rooted in acceptance rather than resistance. Over time, you see that awakening was never about becoming extraordinary, but about becoming intimate with the ordinary. The search for more gives way to the discovery of enough, and in that discovery, a profound sense of freedom arises. You are free not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with it. You remain engaged with the world, but you are no longer defined by its noise. You participate without losing yourself, and you rest without guilt. This balance feels natural, not imposed, because it emerges from clarity rather than discipline. In the end, awakening reveals itself not as a destination reached, but as a way of living that honors depth over distraction, presence over performance, and sincerity over spectacle. You do not need to leave your life to live awake. You simply need to arrive fully in it. And as you do, you realize that living deeply is not something you achieve once and for all, but something you return to, moment by moment, with kindness and patience. This return becomes the quiet rhythm of an awakened life, simple, grounded, and profoundly alive, an invitation to return to the quiet within. As we come to this gentle closing, I want to bring us back to the simplest truth that has been quietly woven through every part of this sharing, which is that awakening does not arrive through searching harder, fixing yourself, or becoming someone new, but through the courage to stop, to pause, and to rest inside what is already here. What we often call awakening is not an achievement waiting in the future, but a remembrance that becomes available the moment we are willing to slow down enough to listen. So much of our lives have been shaped by the idea that meaning is found somewhere else, in the next accomplishment, the next relationship, the next version of ourselves that finally feels complete. Yet again and again, life gently brings us to moments of quiet, sometimes through choice, and sometimes through loss or exhaustion, inviting us to see that what we were seeking was never absent. It was simply obscured by noise, movement, and the constant habit of becoming. This is why stillness matters so deeply, not as an escape from life, but as a doorway back into it. When you stop resisting the present moment, even briefly, something inside you relaxes, and in that relaxation, awareness naturally expands. You begin to feel yourself again, not as a role, not as a story, but as a living presence that has been here all along, patiently waiting beneath the surface of effort. I want to invite you, very gently, to allow small spaces of quiet into your days, not as another task to complete, but as an act of kindness toward yourself. This does not require a perfect environment, special music, or a carefully planned routine. It can happen while sitting with your morning coffee, while standing at a window, or while simply noticing your breath at the end of a long day. These moments do not need to be long to be meaningful, because presence does not measure time the way the mind does. You do not need to change your life all at once for this quiet to matter. You do not need to make dramatic decisions or dismantle everything you have built. Awakening respects the pace of integration, and it unfolds naturally when allowed to move gently through your existing life. Even a few moments of true stillness can soften patterns that have felt rigid for years, because awareness brings its own intelligence. When you rest in silence without trying to achieve anything, you give your nervous system permission to settle, your thoughts permission to slow, and your heart permission to open. In this openness, something subtle but profound begins to shift. You stop relating to life as something you must constantly manage, and begin to feel supported by a deeper rhythm that does not rush or demand. Stillness teaches you how to be with yourself without judgment, without needing to improve or perform. This alone can feel revolutionary in a world that constantly asks you to justify your worth. In quiet presence, you discover that your value was never conditional, and that your being does not need to earn its place in existence. You may notice that as you spend more time in this inner quiet, your outer life begins to respond in unexpected ways. Conversations soften, choices become clearer, and situations that once felt heavy begin to reorganize themselves with less effort. This is not because you are controlling life more effectively, but because you are no longer fighting it internally. There is a kind of wisdom that only reveals itself when the mind stops trying to dominate the experience. This wisdom does not shout instructions or offer rigid answers. It feels more like a gentle knowing, a sense of alignment that guides you without pressure. The more you trust this quiet guidance, the less you need external reassurance to feel steady. I want to be very clear that this path is not about withdrawing from the world or becoming detached from human concerns. It is about meeting life more honestly, without the filters of fear and expectation that once distorted your experience. You still care, you still act, you still engage, but you do so from a place that is rooted rather than reactive. As you allow stillness to become a companion rather than something to avoid, fear begins to loosen its grip, not because life becomes predictable, but because you trust your ability to be present with whatever arises. This trust grows quietly, through lived experience, until it becomes a steady undercurrent beneath the changing conditions of your life. You may also find that silence brings up discomfort at times, old thoughts or emotions that were previously drowned out by busyness. When this happens, remember that nothing is going wrong. Awareness is simply illuminating what was already there, not to punish you, but to free you. Meet these moments with patience and compassion, knowing that healing unfolds when seen, not when suppressed. Over time, stillness stops feeling like an absence and begins to feel like home. It becomes the place you return to when the world feels overwhelming, not to escape it, but to remember how to meet it with clarity and calm. From this place, even action carries a different quality, less driven by fear and more guided by understanding. As we close, I invite you to carry this reflection with you, not as a belief to adopt, but as an invitation to explore through your own experience. Allow yourself moments of quiet without expectation. Allow life to breathe through you without interference. Allow yourself to not know, and to rest in that not knowing with trust. You do not need to become someone else to live awake. You do not need to wait for the perfect moment or the right conditions. Awakening begins exactly where you are, in the simple act of being present without resistance. And perhaps, in one of those quiet moments, when the noise settles and the stories pause, you may feel a gentle recognition arise, not as a thought, but as a remembering. Maybe it will feel like coming home to something familiar yet long overlooked. Maybe it will arrive without words at all, because it could be, very simply, that in this silence, you remember who you are,